Hey fam, how's it going? What is going on? We are almost to week 13, but I think it was actually a pretty solid weekend of football with Thanksgiving and everything else. All things considered, that Eagles and Bills game was an epic game, right down to the wire in overtime. So saw the Bills lose that one, but overall, I think it was a really solid weekend of football. Not a lot of injuries, which is positive. Not a lot to talk about in that department. So that is a positive always, especially with only only 2 more weeks left until the fantasy playoffs start. But there are a lot of buys this week. We have the Ravens, Bills, Bears, Raiders, Vikings, and Giants all on bye this week, which is going to be brutal for some, especially people that are fighting to get into the playoffs. So, without further ado, let's get into some of these situations here, some of these quarterback plays for this week, because we're going to need them because we have some players that are definitely on bye. First off, I put Russell Wilson on here. He's kind of wavering the line. Russell Wilson is rostered about 50% of leagues. He completed 13 of 22 for 134 yards, and he scored today. He also had 34 rushing yards on 11 carries and another touchdown for 17 fantasy points. He now gets a very favorable matchup against the Texans this week, which have allowed the seventh most passing yards and the ninth most fantasy points to quarterbacks. And this is just looks set up to be a really solid matchup. Obviously, passing game script should be there with how well C.J. Stroud has played. He balled out again today, so this is a spot where you can really look to target Russell Wilson. If he's sitting out there, he'd probably be the number one guy that I'd look to add, especially if you're like a Josh Allen owner or something like that. So after that, I went back and forth on how to put these guys on here: Gardner Minshew or Jordan Love. Both of them are in tougher matchups, not the worst, but not the best either. Gardner Minshew versus the Titans. Rostered in 16% of leagues. He completed 24 of 41 passes for 251 yards. He also rushed 3 times for 6 yards, but did find the end zone on the ground for about 14 fantasy points. It wasn't a great game, but this is a decent matchup against the Titans next week. Over the last 4 games, they have allowed the 12th most passing yards and tied for the 6th most passing touchdowns, but they have allowed on the season the 17th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. So on the season, a little bit more mid, but they have showed some signs recently, especially yielding points to the opposing quarterbacks. And this is an offense that will definitely push the pace. They're top 10 in pace this year. So there is some stuff like your Gardner Minshew. Didn't really have the best day, mainly because Jonathan Taylor took away a couple rushing touchdowns. Once they got inside the goal line. So next up, Jordan Love kind of went back and forth on this one as well. This should be the Sunday night football game, I believe. He's rostered in 50% of leagues. He completed 22 of 32 for 268 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. Now, he also rushed 3 times for 39 yards, which is not something he typically does a lot of, but that was good to see. And their win against the Lions on Thanksgiving. Love continues to make the most of his opportunities. He has now thrown 2 or more touchdowns in 4 of his last 6 games. And on the season, he is QB 13. He's also 14th in fantasy points per dropback, 10th in passing yards, and 1st in deep ball passes. So the Chiefs have allowed the 3rd lowest passing yards per game, and they've also allowed the 6th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks. So it's not a great matchup for him, but this is a spot, generally speaking, where you see the Chiefs especially kind of got back on track a little bit today with their offense. And so, usually you see a little bit more of a passing game heavy script. They have struggled at times to stop the deep ball. We saw that a little bit today. And, with Christian Watson kind of maybe finding some life and Jaden Reed, this should be a decent matchup for Jordan Love. Next up is Matthew Stafford. I don't really love this because it is a terrible spot for him, but he did have a monster game in the weirdest way possible because he completed 25 of 33 passes for 229 yards and 4 touchdowns. But it's more impressive that neither Puka or Cooper Kupp had big days. Kyron had a monster day, and Higbee found the end zone twice. But I would have to be pretty desperate to play Stafford, considering the Browns, who they play this week, have allowed the fewest fantasy points to the position. And then lastly, some other guys on here. Kenny Pickett actually looked decent at times today. Their offense actually looked pretty good and what was a kind of a low-scoring game. So maybe, I think you could look there. But it's Kenny Pickett. I don't fucking love that at all. It's Kenny Pickett. Just going to say that again. And then Baker Mayfield doesn't have the best matchup, but he has actually played pretty decently so far this year. And then Bryce Young gets a good matchup, but it's fucking Bryce Young. And I think that he's only scored more than 15 fantasy points once all year. So don't love that either.
Really not a lot to love with the running back ads for week 13 either. This sets up way more in favor for folks that are in deeper leagues. Like if you're like an 8 or a 10 team league, like there's really nothing on here for you, unfortunately. So hopefully you don't need any help at running back. But if you're in deeper leagues, deeper formats, this could be a week where you could pick up some of these guys. To lead it off, I'm going to start off with Dearness Johnson. Starting it off here with him because Tank Bigsby, who, myself included, I thought we were going to see a lot more of him this year. He played 2 snaps today, while Johnson saw 7 carries, ran 17 routes. One of those ended up in a catch for 42 yards. ETN also got banged up in this one, and we've seen his snap percentage drop for the past 3 weeks compared to where it was earlier this season. So I think Dearness Johnson is an interesting add here, but again, more for deep leagues. Keaton Mitchell, I have him here. I have to mention him because he's still only being shown as like 34% roster in ESPN leagues. I understand in competitive leagues, deeper leagues, he's more than likely added, but if for some reason he's sitting out there, check your waivers. Keaton Mitchell needs to be in that 50 plus range. I'm still surprised. I'm surprised to see that he's still sitting where he is at. And then, the handcuff pluses, we've talked about Tyjae Spears a bunch. We know that if they're down, he's going to see a little bit more run versus the favorable game scripts. He should still be owned though. Kenneth Gainwell splitting touches with DeAndre Swift. I thought he looked good on the limited touches that he did get, but obviously if anything happens to Swift, that's going to be a boost for Kenneth Gainwell. Roschon Johnson, throwing him on here. He hasn't looked great in the opportunity he's gotten over the past couple of weeks since returning from injury, but we do have Deonta Foreman out. So if Roschon Johnson can show well on Monday night, maybe he takes that role back over and kind of gets back to the number 2 behind Khalil Herbert. Jamal Williams, he's taking snaps away from Alvin Kamara, but it hasn't really resulted in a ton of opportunities yet. He's someone that should be rostered. And here for your deeper leagues, Cordero Patterson, he's back, baby. In today's game, we saw him get 8 carries with Atlanta leading, so that needs to be taken with a grain of salt. But they do have a soft rest of season schedule. He's also seeing snaps out at wide receiver. So if anything were to happen to Algier or Bijan Robinson, that is going to be increased usage for Cordero Patterson. We saw what he was able to do. Was it last year or the year before when he went on the run that he went on? So again, deeper leagues, you can look to pick him up. Michael Carter is another deep league ad you can look to. He saw similar usage to James Conner, but it's worth noting that the overwhelming majority of his action did come in the fourth quarter with the game out of reach for Arizona. But I thought it was interesting that he took Conner's touches. So if he can start to overtake some of what Amari DiMercado did today in terms of the passing down and third down work, he could be in line for a huge workload if anything were to happen to James Conner. Handcuffs, just to throw out here, Samaje Perine, Rico Dowdle, Eli Mitchell, Chase Edmonds, all those guys should be picked up. If you are in like a 10 or 12 team league, this sets up as a good week to pick up some of these handcuff backs. That way, if anything were to happen going forward or next week, rather, you already have them and you're not fighting the waivers and the priorities and the fabs and all that. So this is a week to do that. And then I kind of switched up the watch list to like an injury watch here. Threw Jeff Wilson on there just because, we have Savon Ahmed hitting IR. Raheem Mostert has been on the injury report for what feels like the past 5 weeks. Devon Achane is banged up. If Achane is back, Jeff Wilson kind of gets pushed to the curb here. But if Achane is out, Jeff Wilson could be like in a spot start for week 13. And the other injury to watch here to Aaron Jones, depending on if he's going to be able to return or not, would be Patrick Taylor. He played 2 fewer snaps than A.J. Dillon in this past week, but only saw 4 opportunities compared to 17 for Dillon. But he did run 7 more routes than Dillon. So if Aaron Jones sits again, we could see Taylor use a little bit more, assuming the Packers are trailing to the Chiefs.
Let's move over to the wide receiver position, and damn it. Like, I don't know how many more weeks in a row I have to talk about Jaden Reed, but we're going to keep doing it, by golly. I'll still only roster in 31% of leagues. I don't get it. Like, I just don't. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. I keep looking at other places, like maybe this place is wrong. And no, it's pretty much all right around 30 to 35%. But once again, top waiver at Jaden Reed had another solid day, hauling in 4 of 8 targets for 34 yards and a touchdown. He also rushed twice for 16 yards for 15 fantasy points. He has now scored 15 or more PPR points in 3 straight games. Because he is a flex option every week. He needs to be rostered in all formats. Unless you're talking about like a 4-team league or something like that, Jaden Reed should be on everybody's roster. He should be on a 10-team league, 12-team, I don't care. Jaden Reed should be rostered. Maybe he is in your league, but apparently he's not in almost 70% of other leagues. So I don't get it. It doesn't make any sense to me, but that's neither here nor there. I put Odell Beckham on here. He's not really He's rostered like 55% of leagues. I try to cover guys that are less than 50%, but I want to put him on there. He's probably he's seeing a little bit more boost of targets. They are playing right now, but he's still like a part-time player. He's not a player that's going to be out here running 80, 90% of the routes. It's not going to be him. He's still going to be a part-time player because of his age, his injury history, because for them to try to get him along. But with with Mark Andrews out, at least probably rest of season, I do think Odell Beckham should be a player that you can at least look at as like a wide receiver 4 flex option type option. Next up is Demario Douglas. Now, this is a situation we're going to have to monitor. Much like Jaden Reed, he shouldn't be rostered in only 36% of leagues, but he did leave with what I think is a concussion. But he led the team today in targets with 9. He turned that into 6 catches for 49 yards. He has now seen 7 or more targets in 4 straight games. He shouldn't be sitting out there at all. But if he is, add him. Next up is Curtis Samuel, 31%. What was targeted 12 times today, on Thanksgiving. Excuse me. He held in 9 of those for 100 yards. We have seen him go on a run similar to this before. He's definitely boomer bust, but in 12 team leagues and above, he should be a plug and play option next week against the Dolphins. Next up is Jalen Hyatt. I kind of struggled with where to actually put him here, like where if we should put him on here or not. But Jalen Hyatt had a really solid day today. He's going to be hard to trust with Tommy DeVito. They are going on bye, but he had his best day, catching 5 of 6 targets for 109 yards this week. Like I said, the third round rookie could carve out a sizable role once they come off the bye week, but this is still the Giants' offense, so I would temper expectations. But he did have some deep opportunities. And I'll say this: like Tommy DeVito hasn't been terrible throwing the ball deep. Like he's been a decent deep ball passer, which really could open things up for Jalen Hyatt. That's kind of what we've been missing from him. We know this dude has incredible speed for and everything else when he was coming out of Tennessee, and that's kind of what we liked. But this offense has just been so dreadful; it really hasn't been able to get a lot going for him. And they have nobody else here, so Jalen Hyatt is an opportunity somebody you can be looking at. And then Khalil Shakur, he's on here. I skipped over him, but again, not a great day today. Only like almost 8 PPR points, but I want players that are tethered to Josh Allen, to elite offenses. They are on bye this week, but he should be rostered. He's pretty much locked in as the wide receiver 3 within this offense. Stashes. A.T. Perry was going to be much lower on here, but the Saints lost both Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed to injuries today. However, should be mentioned, Chris Olave, it looks like a concussion, but this can kind of go either way. For the most part, players that they get a concussion do not play the following week. But we'll see on that. And Rashid Shaheed also left with an injury as well. If he's able to play, but if not, they have fucking nobody else there. Like there's nobody else there to throw the ball to, and so this wasn't a good matchup for A.T. Perry on the outside with the perimeter corners for the Falcons. They've done a really good job of limiting opposing outside wide receivers, and that doesn't really bode well for A.T. Perry. But moving forward, this next matchup against the Lions, I do think this is a better matchup. And so if you're kind of desperate, A.T. Perry could end up being in a really favorable matchup here because there's going to be nobody else for them to throw the ball to. Either they're going to check down to Alvin Kamara and Taysom Hill 72 times, or A.T. Perry could at least see 5 or 6 targets, something like that, against the Lions next week. So I do like A.T. Perry as an ad. Cedric Tillman finally saw some targets this week against the Broncos. He was targeted 5 times. He caught 4 for 55 yards. Third round pick this year as well. He's worthy of a stash, but the quarterback woes and for the rookie third round pick is going to make him hard to trust. Greg Dortch. Now I could have him higher on here. I even thought about putting him as like a must add, mainly just for a play this week. But while the Cardinals got roasted, he had a productive day, seeing 9 targets. He turned that into 3 catches for 27 yards and a touchdown. That really depends on, but really all this depends on is Michael Wilson and his availability. But I do think with him going on bye week 14, I could really well see them hold Michael Wilson out for another week. He's been dealing with his groin injury the last couple of games. They obviously have nothing to play for. But in his absence, Greg Dortch has been solid and seeing a really sizable target share. And so if he were to miss again this week, I think Greg Dortch would be somebody that I definitely would be looking at. So if you're going to be desperate this week, and let's say you have a lot of players that are on bye, like Greg Dortch should be more of a priority for you, especially if you're desperate for a win. Because Greg Dortch in this matchup against the Steelers, which should be a positive one because Steelers have struggled against opposing wide receivers this year. I think Greg Dortch would be like a wide receiver 4 this week. So if you're desperate and need somebody, Greg Dortch would be much higher. I just wasn't for sure about Michael Wilson and his availability. That's why he's a little bit lower. Because once Michael Wilson comes back, I 100% think that he's going to take back over this outside role, and Dortch will kind of go back to what he was doing. Hunter Renfrow was kind of interesting to me because they're starting to utilize him again. Once Josh McDaniel leaves, actually, they start using Hunter Renfrow, who's actually a good wide receiver. Crazy, But it's still Aiden O'Connell, so I'm a little bit hesitant on how much opportunity he's going to see, but he is starting to see more volume. Jalen Tolbert's kind of in the same boat with kind of taking injury, and the rest of these guys are just more like a plug and play. Like you have to be desperate to get there, or maybe some upside, some more injuries. But I will say this with the Chiefs: the Chiefs have suffered two injuries to their wide receiver core, McCole Hardman um, and Kadarius Toney missed. Hardman was placed on IR. It was weird. All of a sudden, they decided to say, "Hey, Rashee Rice, man, like, hey, let's target you now. All these guys are hurt." And what happened? Rashee Rice went out and had a big day today, over 100 yards and a touchdown. Best game of the year for him for sure. But some of these other wide receivers like Sky Moore, you're going to see more opportunity, and just because of their limited wide receiver room, now they're down to 5. So they're not going to be able to spread the ball around as much. So I did put these guys on there. I think either Sky Moore or Justin Watson could be guys you could look at.
As gross as it is everywhere else, the good news is if you need some help at tight end, there actually are some interesting options that you can look at. Patty Fry and Tyler Higbee were kind of like right underneath the 50% threshold, so I'm going to start with them. We saw Patty Fry finally healthy, no Matt Canada. He had himself a massive day, catching 9 of 11 targets for 120 yards. Obviously, we can't count on a 33% target share going forward, but it was good to see him involved early and often nonetheless. Tyler Higbee caught all 5 of his targets, 29 yards, and 2 scores. Obviously, that touchdown percentage and that touchdown rate is not sustainable, but they do have a matchup against the Browns on deck. So we could see those targets remain around the same or potentially even bump up next week because that is a really strong defense. Jawan Johnson, Kev, you were mentioning the injuries that are coming over the Saints receiver room. So some of what he saw today could have been as a result of that. But with the injuries they have, there's really not a ton of options. We finally have Jawan Johnson healthy as well. And we have to remember there was talk about a strong connection between Johnson and Carr during the offseason. So he's at least in the streaming conversation going forward. Tucker Kraft jumped directly into the Luke Musgrave role. He's on IR. So if you need to dig down a little bit deeper, Tucker Kraft can be a plug and play type of option. Again, assuming Kansas City does their thing, this could be a negative game script scenario for Green Bay. Could see Tucker Kraft be involved once again. And then left these last two on here, just guys that are out running a bunch of routes. The production and the fantasy points aren't always there. But K. Doughton, Michael Meyer, both those guys, if the top like 3 to 4 options aren't available, you could look their way. Michael Mayer kind of seemed like Austin Hooper was getting back into the mix a little bit, but then today we saw I think Austin Hooper ran 4 routes all day. Again, not great trusting Aiden O'Connell, especially if we're going to see Jacoby Myers more involved and Hunter Renfrow more involved. But he's out there running routes, and that's basically all we can hope for from a streaming tight end.
Yeah, pretty much for the most part. So yeah, I like that. Let's get some of these questions so we can get out of here. Let's see, Rico. So is this the Rashee Rice official breakout? I think it is. I mean, I don't know. I mean, finally they get him opportunities, and now they started to scheme him in space, which is really important because he is a terrific yards after the catch guy. Which is he broke off that long touchdown run off that. So I think it should be, and especially like I said, they're missing so many wide receivers. They don't really have a choice at this point. They're forced into utilizing these guys, which is what they should have been doing all year. But hopefully, I mean, Rice did have a couple bad drops, or at least one bad drop. But other than that, like he was pretty reliable for most of the day. So yes, I think you can feel pretty good about Rashee Rice.
I don't know if you had a different opinion on this, but Alex want to know Dobbs or Fields for tomorrow night.
Man, down bad, 120. He's down 120.
Or maybe it has 120 points.
Because you're down 100.
If you're down $1.20, Alex, we can hang it up.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully not, but because you're not getting 120 out of Dobbs and a defense, but I probably go Fields if you're desperate for ceiling. I think that's where you go.
Yeah.
Week was good till go against Kyron Williams. Yeah, Kyron Williams is absolutely nuclear. So
yeah.
Should I trade Chase and Logan Thomas for Eckler and Kincaid? Yeah.
Yeah, I would do that.
And you still have Amon-Ra, Adams, and Waddle. Oh, yeah. I mean, not that Eckler has been great because he hasn't. Like, it's been weird that they really haven't utilized him as much in the passing game, at least recently, which is frustrating because,
especially
like,
with the injuries.
yes, you would think that they would be peppering him with targets. They just haven't been. So it's been pretty frustrating. But they've had some rougher matchups. I mean, this is obviously a bad matchup against the Ravens. So that's why I was lower on Herbert this week. But yeah, I still think you should do that. I feel pretty good about that. Isaiah, what do you think about Swift only having 9 points? I think it was like a little more of a game script situation, especially falling down the way they did. It was kind of an ugly game. I mean, and you never know. That's the problem with DeAndre Swift, right? Is that when you have Jalen Hurts, who's going to take opportunities away anytime they get, third, on the goal line, especially on the 1 yard line, they're going to do the tush push, brotherly shove, whatever you want to call it. That's going to take away those opportunities from him. So he's going to have to get there really from like the 2 yard and in or an out, right? And so if he's just not going to get there, they didn't really, and they sometimes don't look for him as much in the passing game. And that's just all the running backs, but they also mix a lot of these guys in and out. And so it's going to be frustrating. There's going to be weeks now. The opportunity was there. The matchup was there. It's just the way the game fell and the way the situation happens. Like that's the frustrating part with the Eagles. And once again, I know the Eagles won this game, but their offense didn't look fantastic for most of that game. They some of those guys got there. DeAndre Swift, or not DeAndre Swift. Devonta Smith is what I was trying to say. Got there. I think he had over 100 yards at a touchdown. AJ Brown did find the end zone, but it wasn't a huge day for him, at least one we're expecting or used to. But would you flip Swift? Yeah, sure, if you can. But it's tough, anytime a player's coming off a little bit of a down week. But yeah, if you can look to flip him, because that's gonna be the frustrating part with DeAndre Swift is that you're never gonna know because he's gonna lose opportunities.
Yeah.
All right, that looks like the last question that's in there. So, with that being said, we're back to a normal week this week. Nothing really any crazy going on here. So we'll be back with after this week, we'll be back with our normal rankings videos. Our must plays of the week, and then we'll do our start and sit stream as we always do to answer you guys' questions, get you guys ready for this week because there's gonna be some questions this week because of 6 teams on bye, and there's a few really good ones on bye this week. So
Yeah.
there's gonna be some serious conversations to be had. And really, it's frustrating too that the NFL does this week 13. So it is frustrating for there. So I mean, next week there's 2 more teams on bye, but it's the Cardinals and somebody else that nobody cares about. So, anyways, that being said, have a good rest of the night. Have a good rest of the weekend, and we will see you again very shortly. Bye bye.